Finance, let me tell you, finance is fairly heavily tested on the CDFM exam. And there's a lot of details in this competency area. So normally when we teach this, there's a lot of highlighting going on if you have your books. And there's also a lot of what we call white space notes, a lot of write-ins. And so I know all of you don't have your books, so I'll be giving you uh, what to highlight, and I'll be uh, listing out the contents there. So um, as I said, a lot of little details and parts to this. So these are our learning objectives. We're going to be talking about the 4 distinct functions of finance. You don't have to write this down because I got a slide coming up, but the 4 functions are entitlement. In other words, we need to make sure there's a law that authorizes this action, and then there's someone in authority that has approved this action. That's the entitlement piece. Then there's paying, collecting, and controlling. So those are the 4 major functions we're going to be talking about, but we're going to dig a little bit into each one of those. We're going to talk about, again, some of the key personnel here, the accountable officials. And these are dispersing officers, certifying officers, DAOs, departmental accountable officials. And we'll dig deeper into some of their responsibilities. And then policies, pecuniary liability, and then some of the safeguards. Okay. Finance in itself is about, it's the science of managing funds. Okay, it's about managing money and all the transactions that pertain to that money. That's what finance really is. I want you to write a little note on this page. Okay, budgeting is not part of finance. All right, budgeting is not a part of finance. Again, we're going to be talking about entitling, paying, collecting, controlling, and so on. Not budgeting. So let's talk about this. These are the 4 functions. You may want to make sure you know these. This is a great place for one of those not type questions that we talk about. And it shows you the different volumes in the FMR that relate to the entitlement process, because what that covers really is certifying, how we certify and how we process vouchers. Payments are covered, but all our dispersing policy is listed in volume 5. Collections, again, that's in volume 5, and then control is a lot of that's in volume 5. You do not need to know the individual volumes of the FMR. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Rich already had mentioned that you do not need to memorize it. There's 16 volumes in the FMR. You do not need to know the titles of all 16 volumes. So we're talking about DOD. DOD is, I mentioned the other day, and Rich mentioned, DOD gets special authority that other agencies do not receive. In our case, the Secretary of Defense has statutory authority given to him to disperse funds. Okay, SecDef has statutory authority to disperse funds. Not every agency has that. Matter of fact, really only the Marshal's Office, Marshal Service, and Department of Homeland Security have authority to disperse funds. The only reason Homeland Security has it is because the Coast Guard falls under Homeland Security in time of peace. Now, under time of war, the Coast Guard rolls back under the Navy. But so any of the other agencies, Treasury serves as a dispersing authority and function, performs dispersing functions for all these other agencies. But SecDef has statutory authority to disperse funds. He in turn delegates that authority down to DFAS. Okay, so he passes that on to DFAS. So DFAS acts as pretty much an agent of the Department of Treasury. A little bit of history for some of you that may not know this. DFAS didn't always exist. Okay. Prior to 1991, if you worked in the Army, you had Army finance offices that did your, paying and dispersing and so on. If you were in the Navy, we had what were called Navy Regional Finance Centers. The Air Force had their own Air Force finance centers. Okay, and everybody did their own thing. And you remember earlier today, I think I was talking about in the 90s, there was a Berlin Wall had come down and peace was breaking out all over the place, and they were looking for savings throughout the government, but especially in DOD. So when they're looking for savings, they're looking at where do we have overlap. And so in 1991, Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense at that time, and they started looking at how we do dispersing and finance. And we had, Army finance centers, Navy regional finance centers, Air Force finance centers. Someone asked the question, what do all these guys do? And they go, well, they pay vendors, they pay military, they pay civilians, they process travel vouchers and this and that. And they go, don't they all do the same thing? And the answer was yes. And so in 1991, Dick Cheney signed out this thing called DMRD 910. That stood for Defense Management Review Decision. And basically what he did is all you folks that work for Army, Navy, and Air Force now work for this new organization called DFAS. So essentially they capitalized them in place. They capitalized all the individuals, all the people working there. They capitalized all the equipment, all their assets. And they went from being Army, Navy, Air Force to this new purple organization called DFAS. Yeah. So that's kind of a quick history and how they came into being. Now I mentioned, we got FMRs here, and I got 3 slides on the different FMRs. Rich mentioned this the other day. You may see a question, and the question may be, where could I find, the policy for civilian pay? And they'll list out all these choices, A, B, C, and D, but you won't see volume 8 listed as one of the choices. What you will see is, you want to write this down, we already talked about it, DOD 7000.14R. Okay, DOD 7000.14R, because that represents all 16 volumes of the FMR. That's what I said. You do not need to memorize the different names of the different volumes and stuff. Just remember DOD 7000.14R. So here's some of the laws and regs that we're going to be talking about. We've already talked a lot about Title 10. We will talk a little bit about the Debt Collection Improvement Act of 1996. Because, we have folks that are sometimes they owe money back to the government. Treasury runs this program called TOPS, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but TOPS stands for Treasury Offset Program. And if you're one of the federal agencies, you are required to refer what they call non-tax debt to Treasury if someone's delinquent or if someone owes the Treasury money. And they use this TOPS program because basically it's a crosswalk between names of individuals and let's say you're a contractor and you owe the government money, they use your tax identification number, and they could go in and do pay offsets. And this is used for vendors if you're a federal employee, if you're receiving Social Security payments, if you're a federal retiree and you owe the government money, they're going to have your information and they're going to do an offset. Okay, so it's called TOPS, Treasury Offset Program. We're going to talk a little bit about prompt payment, and I'll walk you through a prompt payment exercise. You will have to compute the prompt payment due date on the CDFM exam, so we'll kind of walk through that later on. A couple other things here. Down at the very bottom, some of the U.S. codes, Title 31. There's a couple of sections listed here. You want to jot this down. 3325, Section 3325. That talks about that addresses the certification of invoices. Section 3528, that talks about certifying officer responsibilities. If any of you are certifying officers, you want to take a look at that. And 3529, that talks about what Rich already mentioned. It talks about advanced decisions. Okay. So let's talk about the entitlement process. And the entitlement process in itself, this is the first major function. I said there were 4 functions of finance. So these are the 4 components of the entitlement process. Entitling, authorizing, voucher prep, and certification. So the very first one, entitling. You have to make sure there's a law that authorizes your action. We talked a lot about this in fiscal law. You can only do what the law has given you authority to do. So you have to make sure that there's a law that authorizes your action before you do anything. So some of you out there may be civilians, right? So you're in class 40 hours this week. You're not at your desk. Are you still going to get paid for being at work? Even though you're not at work, you're sitting in class all day. And the answer is yes, because there was a law passed called GETA, Government Employees Training Act, back in the 50s, and it authorizes civilians to receive pay if they have to, or travel, per diem, anything, if they have to go on trading. Okay, so there's a law there. It's been codified under Title V, civilian personnel. For military, there's in Title 10, there's a law that provides for GMT, General Military Training. Okay, so you always have to make sure there's a law that authorizes your action. And then that action has to be authorized. Okay, and this usually authorizations have a signature block. Someone approved for you to attend this class. A lot of you, or all of you, probably fill out a standard form 182, a training request to attend this class. They use that. I don't know if there's going to be a bill for that, but they use that to document the training. Okay, someone authorized that. Okay, and so we use these types of authorizations. These document the entitlement. Okay, and these go to the dispersing officer as backup documents when they're dispersing funds. It shows that someone has approved this. And then they go into voucher preparation. Okay, the DO, before they're going to make a payment, they're going to make sure it's been certified and the voucher contains complete and accurate data, and they have to be forms submitted in forms that are used by the comptroller, approved by the comptroller general. So in the case of, let's say, a contract, there's a couple of documents that are required. You don't have to write these down because we'll talk about them later. But there's got to be a copy of the contract. There has to be a proper, what we call a proper invoice. And a little bit later, we'll go into what makes up a proper invoice. There's actually 10 specific items which must comprise a proper invoice. If any of these items are missing, it has to get sent back. One of the other factors before a DO is going to make a payment, he's got to show proof of a receipt and acceptance. Did this actually occur? Okay, so there's some certain things that are involved in this voucher prep and certification. Okay, now a certifying officer who certifies the voucher is responsible for a couple of things. I'm going to have you write this down if you don't have a book. They're responsible for the information in the voucher. the information in the voucher. They're responsible for any computations that may be on the voucher. Rich covered that. They're responsible for the computation. And they're responsible for the propriety of the proposed payment. Okay. Purpose, time, and amount. Okay. All right. Write this in. Here's another little write-in note. The certifying officer is not responsible for the timeliness of the payment. Okay, that's not the certifying officer's job. He's responsible for those other things, but he is not responsible for the timeliness of the payment. This is probably one of those not type questions that you may see. They list a couple things out, but he's not responsible for the timeliness of the payment. Here's that law we talked about earlier, Public Law 104-106. And this was a public law, 104. It was passed by the 104th Congress way back in 1996. Okay. And what this law says it requires that certifying officers shall always be personally liable for any wrong payment. Okay, resulting from his or her negligent performance of duties. Okay, remember Rich was talking about they're assumed guilty until they could prove innocence. So they're assumed to be negligent until they can prove otherwise. That's why they have to have internal controls, good internal controls. So when this law was initially passed back in 1996, the Pentagon took this and said certifying officers will now possess pecuniary liability. Okay, they didn't really have it until this law was passed. Okay, so the Pentagon sent out to all the services, and all the services sent it down to all their major commands that certifying officers are now pecuniarily liable, and then they could go ahead and appoint other individuals that are providing them information, i.e. DAOs, and make them pecuniarily liable also. Okay, I was working then. I was the comptroller. I got this, and I figured these guys knew what they were talking about, so I started making individuals that were not necessarily certifying officers, but DAOs, making them pecuniarily liable. Have you ever run into a person, one of these guys or gals that like to question everything that comes down the line? Well, there was one of these individuals working down at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, worked for the Army. And he was one of these individuals. He was not a certifying officer, but he got his letter saying you are now a DAO and you are now pecuniarily liable. Well, this is one of those guys that likes to check everything. And he went to the law and he looked at the law and kind of read exactly what it said. And he goes, he went to his boss that had given him the letter and he goes, hey, this doesn't say, this says you're pecuniarily liable. It doesn't say anything about me being pecuniarily liable. And he challenged it. Well, the boss looked at it and then they sent it up the chain of command. It went to their MAGCOM. It went up to Big Army. It went up to DOD. And it went back to GAO. And GAO looked at it and they said, he's right. Doesn't say that. Okay. And everybody had to pull back all the letters they'd given everybody, making them DAOs. But kind of in their same breath, they go, it's probably not a bad idea if we do this, though. And then later on, as Richard mentioned, in the 2003 Defense Authorization Bill, they gave DOD the authority to establish DAOs and to pass on pecuniary liability. So that's kind of a little background on that whole thing. Now, I'm going to go to this next slide. Here's one of those add-on slides we have here. So this kind of summarizes a lot what we talked about in fiscal law and what we're going to be talking about in under finance. Okay, remember we broke folks into two groups. Those who have fiduciary responsibility, and those are the ones that are certifying to the purpose, time, and amount, the legality of the payment, in other words. So signing out a request for contractual procurement, or signing out a MIPR, project order, and so on, they have to make sure their purpose, time, and amount is all accurate. And again, if you violate any of those, you have an ADA. The other group, the pecuniary responsibility. Okay, and they want to make sure that these are certifying officers, and these can be DAOs and others, that the payments are proper. Okay, and so the pecuniary means they can be held personally liable for anything that's considered an improper payment. So I want you to write down some things here. We're going to talk about accountable individuals, but I want you to take a couple of notes. Normally I write this on a whiteboard when we're doing a class. So write down dispersing officer. So dispersing officers, I'm trying to simplify this whole, what these functions of these individuals. Dispersing officers make payments, okay? That's their job. Their job is to make payments. And they act as the agent of the Treasury. Okay? Dispersing officers make payments. Write down certifying officers. Certifying officers approve payments. Okay, they approve payments. We always like to think of certifying officers as the last line of defense between payment and the taxpayer. No payments are made unless they've been certified. So they're kind of the last line of defense there. And then we'll go over some of the responsibilities of certifying officers. Okay, DAOs, Department Accountable Officials. DAOs provide source information to certifying officers. Okay, DAOs provide source information to certifying officers. Okay, so DAOs can be like time and attendance clerks. They could be purchase card holders. They could be someone, a receiving agent down on the loading dock. Okay, let's say we ordered 100 widgets, and the shipment comes in. We got the receiving clerk down on the loading dock. His job is to go out, and when these widgets come in, his job is to go out and count them, make sure they all look like they're not broken or damaged. And then he signs a receiving report, and he sends it up to the certifying officer for him to certify for payment. Okay. Well, certifying officer is not going to go back downstairs and recount everything. He's gonna certify based on that individual's signature. So they can be held pecuniarily liable if we get 90 widgets and he has signed for 100, and 100 widgets, are what we're billed for and what we pay for. So if you're a DAO, I mentioned earlier, or if you're a certifying official, you've probably been asked to fill out a DD Form 577. Okay. And if you look at what you filled out, it uses those words pecuniary liability in there. Another type of person that's considered an accountable individual is a cashier. Okay, cashier. And what cashiers do, they collect, they store, and they disperse funds. Okay, cashiers collect, store, and disperse funds. And then finally, we have what are called collection agents. Collection agents. Collection agents, they collect funds, they store the funds, and they deposit the funds. Okay. Now, most of these folks do not deal with cash. Certifying officers generally don't deal with cash, checks, things like that. DAOs usually don't deal with cash, checks, anything else. Dispersing officers, collection officers, cashiers, they do get cash and checks. Okay. And also, you could list other, okay, other people that may have cash. And I put other under there. Let's say you are going on travel and you don't have a travel card, you're not a frequent traveler, and so they give you a travel advance, a cash travel advance. We still do those things. Anyway, you get an advance for $1,000 because you're going to go on a trip. You forget about that government check they gave you and you lose it, or you go out and spend it. You're still accountable for that check. Okay, you fall into the other category. So, okay, let's see. We talk about certifying officers here. Certifying officers, I mentioned they're pecuniarily liable for erroneous payments resulting from the negligent performance of their duties. Write this in there. They become liable the moment the payment is made. All right. They become liable the moment the payment is made, not when they sign their signature. As soon as the payment gets made, that's when they become pecuniarily liable. To be a certifying officer, there are minimum qualifications. I would venture a guess that some of you are certifying officers, and so you have to have minimum qualifications. So let me read some of these. Number one, you have to have knowledge of the subject matter. Now, knowledge of the subject matter. Number two, background or experience in preparation of the voucher. Okay, you gotta know how to prepare a voucher. 3, knowledge of appropriations. Remember, you got to make sure the purpose, time, and amount. So you have to know about appropriations. And 4, knowledge of the payment process. And again, these are in your book. If you have a book, or highlight that first paragraph on page 12. Talk about dispersing officers. I said dispersing officers make payments. No payments are made unless they have been certified. In the book, and you may want to make a note on this, a dispersing officer is not eligible for appointment as a certifying officer and may not appoint a certifying officer. Okay, a DO is not eligible for appointment as a certifying officer and may not appoint a certifying officer. This goes back to the internal controls that we talked about the other day. You want that good separation of duty. We talked about advanced decisions. Rich talked about advanced decisions. So dispersing officers, they have the authority to refuse to make any payment that may be illegal or improper. The DO and a certifying officer, if they believe it to be a payment to be illegal or proper, it should not be certified or paid. So they have the authority to refuse to make any payment that might be illegal or improper. Okay, we were talking about improper payments. There's been a couple of laws passed. The one they called Improper Payment Elimination and Recovery Act. We call that IPERA. And then the other one is Improper Payment Elimination and Recovery Act, IPERA. All these things, I think about every president the last 20 years or so, 30 years, has tried to address our growing problems with improper payments. The slide here says $140 billion. Um, the slide I have in the book says almost $175 billion, and that was back in 2019. I would venture to guess with all the COVID relief funds that have gone out, you're starting to see stories appear on the news about how much money was paid improperly. The general rule in government, when you have these big programs like that where they're paying out a lot of money, 10% of them are subject to fraud, waste, and abuse, at least 10%. I'm estimating under all that COVID relief, those trillions of dollars that were sent out, I thought I heard someone say not too long ago, we're almost up to 20%. 20% of that would be subject to fraud, waste, and abuse. And you're starting to hear stories about that. Some of these folks that claim they were running a business and they had 100 employees working for them, and actually there was never a business, but they got money for all their employees and to keep them working and this and that. There's going to be a lot of Justice Department is going to be really busy trying to find these people. So I'm guessing that our improper payments are easily going to be over 200 billion here shortly, if not a lot more. Now, what is an improper payment? Okay. Basically, the book says it's a payment that should not have been made, right? Okay, but there's improper payments are usually three different types. It's the right amount of money, but it goes to the wrong recipient. Okay, so it's the right funds, the wrong recipient. Or it could be the right recipient and then the wrong funds. It could be an overpayment or an underpayment. Both of those are considered an improper payment. And finally, the third category is the person receiving the funds is ineligible. It's an ineligible recipient. Now, DOD, we're a culprit, okay, but we are not the big culprits when it comes to these billions and billions of dollars. Most of DOD's improper payments fall under a couple of categories: military pay, civilian pay, and travel. Okay, and we're culpable probably for a couple of billion, but not the hundreds of billions that you're seeing here. Most of that money, it's in things in agencies like HHS, Health and Human Services. And this is where we're talking about Medicare, prescription drugs, people, doctors filing false Medicare, claims, that type of stuff. Social Security is a big one. Grandma died and no one ever reported her death, and her son-in-law keeps collecting her check. Okay, so these are the big ones. Labor Department for unemployment compensation is a big one. Agriculture, food stamps, people getting food stamps are not eligible. Department of Education with school lunches. We have so many entitlements out there anymore. It's ripe for fraud, and a lot of people know how to work the system. So those are, I don't think you need to know the number. It's nice to know like I say, the order of magnitude, but that number is going to keep changing as time rolls on here. Okay, what I want to do now, we were talking about entitlements. I'm going to start talking about entitlements and some of the things that we do in DOD. So first thing, it's going to be military pay entitlements. Okay, and most of you guys are going to be familiar with this. First of all, it says military members' pay is always calculated on a 30-day month, based on a 30-day month. So as far as pay is concerned, January has 30 days, February has 30 days, March has 30 days. Okay. Military are also entitled to what's called special pay. Yeah. Now, special pay is pay over and above base pay. So, in the medical community, this could be medical dental officers. Um, if you know how to fly, you could get aviation pay. There's things like hazard duty pay, hostile fire pay. If you're proficient in some language, you could get foreign language proficiency pay, submarine pay. So there's all sorts of these categories. You don't need to know the individual categories by any means, but again, special pay is over and above base pay. Talk about leave. Okay. Um, Leave is a right. It's not a privilege. Sometimes higher ups may view it as a privilege, but it's a right. You are entitled to leave. So I want to write this down. If you don't have a book, military members are entitled to 30 days of leave per year. Military members are entitled to 30 days leave per year. And I'm going to write this down. Upon separation or retirement, they may sell back up to 60 days of unused leave during their career. So they could sell back up to 60 days. Okay. Probably two test questions right there. They're entitled to 30 days of leave per year, and they may sell back up to 60 days of unused leave. Part of military pay entitlements, this thing called allowances. So the big difference between what pay and allowances is that allowances are, for the most part, not taxable. So let me cover a couple of these things. Military members get a subsistence allowance, okay, BAS, basic allowance for subsistence. They also may get a quarters allowance, BAH. Now there's a thing here I'm going to have you either highlight or if you have a book, but I'm going to give it to you. Let me read it and then I'll go over it slowly. If a military member dies on active duty, their family members are entitled to remain in quarters or continue to receive quarters allowance for 365 days after the death of the member. Okay. So if a military dies on active duty, their family members are entitled to remain in quarters or continue to receive quarters allowance for 365 days after the death of the member. You might see this as a test question. This wasn't always the case. Up till 2006, this was 180 days. And you got to think about that. We were having a lot of members over in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they were getting killed. And so if their family was back in housing, then 6 months later, they're kicking them out of housing. So that was pretty rude. And so Congress got wind of that, and they passed the law and extended it for 365 days. Military members also get clothing and uniform allowance. Okay. And there are such things as personal allowances. And this is given to, these are based usually upon assignment or position. These are usually like installation commanders, general officers. A lot of these guys have to sometimes tend a lot of extra social functions. And so this is paid to high rank officers to cover that some of those extra costs. Some of this money can be taxable, right? Okay, before we leave this, I'm going to give you another white space note. So write this down. A reservist with no dependents, assigned to active duty training, can get partial BAH. Can get partial BAH. So a reservist with no dependents who's assigned to active duty training can get partial BAH. I think they call this BAH2, if I'm not mistaken. So why that's there, and it's not in the book, don't know, but you may want to make sure you remember that. Okay, allotments. Got a test question on this page too. Allotments are broken into two types. You have discretionary allotments and non-discretionary allotments. Discretionary allotments are those type of allotments that can be started, stopped, or adjusted at will. Just here, you want to write this down if you don't have a book. Discretionary allotments, a member can elect up to 6 discretionary allotments. A member can elect up to 6 discretionary allotments. Non-discretionary allotments have an unlimited number, okay? And non-discretionary allotments that can be voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary things are things like savings bond, combined federal campaign, or if you want to contribute to Navy Marine Corps relief, those are voluntary. Involuntary allotment would be something like child support. You know, they're going to take money out of your pay for child support, or alimony, if you're delinquent on your taxes, things like that. Okay. So non-discretionary are unlimited. Discretionary allotments, a member can elect up to 6, no more than 6. Okay, so those are all military entitlements. Let's look at civilians here. So civilian employees, they are paid based on time and attendance records. They're based on a 52 pay periods per year. Okay. Hours worked, it says the certifying time attendance becomes the basis for paying employees for the hours they have worked. Let me read something here. If compensatory time is earned, it must be used within 26 pay periods. Okay, not a year, within 26 pay periods and prior to separation. So if a civilian employee has comp time, they have to use it within 26 pay periods, 52 weeks, and prior to separation, or it gets paid out as overtime. Premium pay. Premium pay in the civilian world is like special pay in the military. Okay, so premium pay are things like overtime pay, and some things that they get. They also do like night pay, holiday pay, things like that. Write this down. If a member goes on TDY, is not considered premium pay. Okay. Temporary duty travel is not considered premium pay. This probably came from one of those not type questions. Okay, sometimes civilians may, DFAS may make a mistake and overpay an individual. Okay, so if you are overpaid, and you want to write this down, this is one of those white space notes. Individuals who have been overpaid must do one of 2 things. One, they have to either set up a repayment plan, okay, how you're going to pay that back, or they're going to garnish your wages. The government is going to get its money one way or another. So you either set up a repayment plan. Maybe they really they've been overpaying you for years and years and years, and it's a lot of money, you would set up a repayment plan, or they're going to take it out of your take it out of your paycheck. Okay, on civilian pay, civilians are also entitled to leave. And it says the time and attendance becomes the basis for paying employees for hours they have worked and not worked. Okay, so there was a lot of lead acts passed. And a lot of these things occurred in the 90s. So I'm going to go over a couple of them and I'll tell you which ones to focus on. The first one is what's called the Family Friendly Leave Act. And what this does, this allows employees to use sick leave to provide care for family members and significant others. So the employee may use up to 104 hours of sick leave, even though they're not sick. That's 13 days. Okay, 104 hours is 13 days. I would make a note of this one. Okay, so even if you're not sick, under this law, you could use sick leave to care for a family member. A lot of times the federal government takes the lead on passing legislation that later on, a lot of times they do this so that companies will adopt these types of things. They're trying to be a good employer. So remember that one. They use sick leave even though they're not sick, up to 104 hours to take care of a family member or a significant other. We have this thing called DoD Leave Sharing Program. Okay, that allows the voluntary leave transfer, and you set up you donate leave and it goes into a leave bank. In ethics, like we talked about, you cannot contribute leave directly to a supervisor. Let's say you're a subordinate and your supervisor's sick. You cannot. It's like a gift to a supervisor. You're not supposed to do that. So the way we get around that, your leave gets put into a leave bank, and the person, if he happens to be the supervisor, they draw all off of this leave bank that's out there. It's a pool, so everybody contributes to this one bank. So he doesn't know he's getting your leave or someone else's leave. It's just a leave bank. We have this thing called excused absences, absence from duty without loss of pay and without charge to leave. In DC, you guys get a lot of snow days. Someone shakes out a mop out of a top floor window and they close the schools because they think it's snowing. So snow days, things like that. Any admin leave if there's something going on where they're blocking the streets in Washington D.C. Inauguration day, they close down Washington D.C. That's considered excused leave. That's an admin leave. Bone marrow or organ donor leave provides paid leave up to 7 days for bone marrow and 30 days for organ donation. Okay. Make sure you know that you can only donate one of your kidneys. You can't donate both. And then we have this thing called leave without pay. For the most part, all leave must be requested and it has to be authorized, even leave without pay. If you don't request it and it's not authorized, it's called AWOL. Okay, so all leave, regardless. And if you're a supervisor, they teach you that. All leave must be requested and approved. And then the last one here is this Family and Medical Leave Act. It provides up to 12 work weeks of job-protected unpaid leave during any 12-month period for the birth and care of the employee's newborn child. The one I would focus on for testing purposes is the first one I mentioned, the Family Friendly Leave Act. So the next time we update this book, we're going to have to add another one of these. I mentioned this the other day when we were talking about some of the changes in the 2022 Authorization Act, that thing called parental bereavement leave. And this just got passed, got put in the Authorization Act this year. And what this is going to allow is 2 days admin leave without loss of pay or leave when an employee's son or daughter dies. Okay, so this has already been put into Title V, but it won't be on your test. Okay, so those are some of the entitlements for military and civilians. What I want to talk about now is control of employees' pay records. There's some very specific guidelines on the separation of duty that we must have in place when you're dealing with civilian pay records. Normally, I would have you highlight this. I don't think there's a test question on here, but there must be separation between the employees who are certifying the time and attendance. There must be separation between the individuals that are compiling the payroll and certifying the payments. Must be separation for those recording the payroll data in the pay accounts. And then finally, for the individuals responsible for supporting the computer systems. You got to have good separation of duties when it comes to pay. Again, pay is one of those areas. It's one of those areas with a lot of improper payments, fraudulent payments, those types of things. So all employees' pay records get recorded into what is called a master pay record. Write this down if you don't have a book. Civilian pay records must be retained for 56 years. Okay. Civilian pay records must be retained for 56 years. Reconciliation of civilian pay records. The FMR requires a reconciliation be accomplished at least every 4 months. Okay, and this is so they can make sure common data elements like schedule, work schedules, salaries, all that stuff is date of birth, is all reconciled. Okay, so it must be accomplished at least every 4 months. Deductions for federal income tax withholding. So normally employees will fill out a W-4 form when they're working, and they'll put in there how much deductions they want, how many dependents they're claiming, and so on. However, and that's taken out of their regular pay. But let's say the employee gets a cash award. Okay, I want to write this down. Cash awards have a flat rate withholding of 25%. Okay, so that's not considered part of your regular pay. It's a one-time, cash award. So that is, they withhold roughly a flat rate of 25% for cash awards. So for income tax purposes, your employer, which would be the government, they have to, you might want to write this down, they have to submit W-2s to their civilians by not later than 31 January in the new fiscal year. Okay, and if you're a contractor, contractors receive 1099s. Contractors, 1099s also have to be mailed out to the individual by 31 January. What DFAS then will subsequently do is they send all payroll files of employees to the IRS not later than 28 February. Let me do a couple more things here. No, not yet. Got one more special pay that I want to talk about. Civilians can get this thing called special pay, but but it's not the same as military here. So special pay is when, for whatever reason, you are underpaid. And you can go in and ask for a special pay. Okay, so in the book it says special pay will be made to employees who are erroneously omitted from the payroll. If you're paid less than 90% of your regular biweekly pay, you can request special pay. So employees, for whatever reason, DFAS really screwed up. You are paid less than 90% of your biweekly pay, you could request a special pay. You might want to highlight that or in your book or write that down. If you're paid less than 90% of your regular biweekly pay, you're authorized for special pay. Okay, I'm going to just talk a little bit about travel. I'm not going to try to cover everything because there's a lot of questions on travel. So let me just talk about a couple of things that I'm going to have you write in. Okay. Some of you have probably heard, but I'm going to say this for those of you that may not have heard this. What are VOCO orders? VOCO. Okay. And it stands for verbal orders of the commanding officer, VOCO orders. Okay. Now, VOCO orders are used, again, they're just that. It's like a verbal contract. Let me give you an example. I told you I worked down in New Orleans for about 12 years or so with the Navy Reserves. So I was down in New Orleans in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina came on shore. And the Navy Reserves and the Marine Corps Reserves were located right in that area that you saw on TV, down in that 9th Ward area that you saw underwater. Well, anyway, Hurricane Katrina was never supposed to hit New Orleans. All the hurricane specialists and the weatherman had that thing going into Florida. And so when we left work on Friday, Hurricane Katrina came ashore on Sunday. When we left work on Friday, Hurricane Katrina was heading directly towards Apalachicola, Florida. Anyway, Saturday morning, I got this call, and it said basically that the admiral said, "Go to your safe place." We all, we knew that even before Hurricane Katrina, that New Orleans was probably one of the most vulnerable cities in the country when it comes to hurricanes. So we had actually had a hurricane coordinator on board, and so we had good phone trees and everything else where we could make sure everybody gets contacted. We had a lot of military, a lot of civilians located down there. And so basically what this call said was the admiral is issuing VOCO orders, go to your designated safe place. Well, our designated safe places were one of two places. Half the staff went to Fort Worth, Texas, and the other half went to Millington, Tennessee. We had places already waiting for us to go to in case we had to evacuate, which we did. And so those were VOCO orders. Now, here's what I want to have you write down, because you may see a question about this. You may not proceed on travel in anticipation of VOCO orders. Okay? So a lot of people, when they start seeing hurricanes spinning in the Gulf, they know they're going to hit land. Hurricanes don't back up. So they're going to hit somewhere. They're going to hit Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, or Texas, or Mexico. So they generally don't retreat and go somewhere else. And so a lot of people get nervous and they want to start leaving ahead of time. Well, they have to do that on their own dime. So you may not proceed on orders, and then you may not proceed on travel in anticipation of VOCO orders. That's one note. Also write this down. You cannot be reimbursed based on VOCO orders. They must be reduced to writing. In other words, you ultimately, before you can get any money for being on travel, These things have to be reduced to writing, much like a contract we were talking about. If you have a verbal contract, it's got to be reduced to writing before it can be a legal document. So yeah, VOCO orders must be reduced to writing. In other words, they must be put on an official order before you can actually get paid on those things. Yeah, we were, Hurricane Katrina came ashore in late August. We stayed, everyone in the organization, civilians, military, family members, we stayed on orders for 6